Some men get pushed out of their children's lives slowly, quietly, one small humiliation at a time, until the day they look in the mirror and don't recognize the man looking back. That was never going to be me. But my daughter didn't know that yet. My name is Hank Doss, 64 years old. Retired contractor, bad knee, and apparently, according to my daughter Melissa and her husband Ryan Crane, a servant who hadn't been serving hard enough. Let me tell you how we got here. Broad Ripple, Indianapolis, north side of the city, tree-lined streets, old houses with character, the kind of neighborhood where people still wave from their porches, and the coffee shops know your order by Wednesday of your first week. Melissa grew up 6 blocks from the house she now rents with Ryan. She knows every shortcut, every neighbor, every corner. She married Ryan Crane 2 years ago in a ceremony at a venue in Carmel that I wrote a check for without being asked twice, because that's what fathers do, and because I genuinely believed at the time that Ryan Crane was going to make my daughter happy. I was generous with that belief longer than I should have been. Ryan is 36. He does financial software consulting from a home office in their 3rd bedroom. He dresses like he's always on his way to a meeting he considers beneath him. He has a handshake designed to reassure you and eyes that are already somewhere else when he uses it. I noticed all of this at the wedding. I filed it under "give him time" and moved on. I moved into their guest room on January 8th, 8 days after my knee replacement surgery at Methodist Hospital. My surgeon, a direct, no-nonsense woman named Dr. Patrice Coleman, who I liked immediately because she gave me facts without decoration, was clear. Ground floor access, no stairs, someone nearby for the first 6 to 8 weeks of recovery. My apartment has stairs. Melissa had a ground floor guest room, a genuine open-door offer, and a soft heart that has never once let her father down when he actually needed her. The trouble was the man she'd brought into that soft heart. Ryan's feelings about a father-in-law in residence materialized the way bad weather does on a job site, gradually, then all at once. First came the atmosphere. The thermostat wars conducted entirely through passive adjustment. The loaded silence when I used the last of something in the kitchen without immediately replacing it. The particular energy of a man who considers his home a performance space and resents having an audience that didn't audition. Then came the expectation. I am not sure exactly when Ryan Crane decided that a 64-year-old man recovering from major surgery in his guest room was a domestic resource. But by the end of January, it had become a working assumption in that house. Dishes expected clean, trash expected out, packages expected signed for, errands expected run when Melissa was at work and Ryan was on his all-important calls. Not asked. Expected. The way you expect a dishwasher to run if you push the button. I did most of it, not because Ryan wanted me to, because I was in someone else's home and I believe in contributing. The issue was never the tasks. The issue was the architecture of what was being built around those tasks. The slow, deliberate construction of a version of me that existed in that house to make Ryan Crane's life easier. Contractors know what a load-bearing wall looks like. They also know what it looks like when someone is trying to knock one down. I had been watching it happen for 8 weeks. I had been doing something about it for 3. Sunday, March 2nd, 6:52 in the evening. Melissa had made pot roast. Good. The kind that comes apart in the slow cooker after 4 hours. We were at the dinner table, the 3 of us, when Ryan pushed his empty plate aside and looked at me with the expression of a man who has rehearsed something and decided tonight is the night. Melissa and I have been talking. Here we go. I set down my fork, not dramatically, just set it down. I looked at my daughter. Melissa's eyes were on the table. We think it's time to talk about your role here. Ryan folded his hands, actually folded them like he was about to conduct a performance review. Living arrangements like this only work when everyone contributes. And lately, Hank, we feel like the balance is off. What balance would that be? You're comfortable here. We get that. But comfort has to come with contribution. Real contribution. Melissa works. We need this household to run, and right now the weight isn't being shared the way it needs to be. I looked at my daughter. Melissa, is this what you want to say to me? She looked up. Her jaw was set in the way it gets when she's committed to something she's not entirely sure about. She gets that from me too, which made it worse to see. Dad, we just need things to be more defined. What your responsibilities are, what we can count on you for. And if I don't agree to those responsibilities? The room was quiet for a moment. Then Melissa, My daughter, the girl I raised in this neighborhood, the girl whose bedroom I built with my own two hands, looked at me and said, "Then maybe this isn't the right arrangement anymore. Either you're here to contribute, properly, or this isn't going to work." Short sentences. Borrowed language. Ryan's sentence structure coming out of her mouth. "You're saying serve your husband, or leave. Dad. That's not. Melissa." My voice was quiet. Not cold. Quiet. The voice I use when I need a job site to stop and listen. "Is that what you're saying?" A long pause. She looked at Ryan. He gave her the smallest nod, the nod of a man who's been coaching this conversation for weeks. "We need you to commit to being a real part of this household." Translation confirmed. I felt something in my chest right then, not anger, not hurt, something cleaner than both. The specific clarity of a man who has been waiting for a signal and has just received it. I smiled. Not a performance. Not sarcasm. A genuine chest-deep smile of a man who packed a suitcase 5 days ago and put an envelope in a nightstand drawer 3 weeks ago, and has been sitting with both of those things waiting for exactly this moment. "Okay," I said. "Thank you for being honest." I stood up, walked to the guest room, picked up the navy Samsonite by the door, walked back through the kitchen, past the pot roast, past the table where Ryan was sitting with the expression of a man who expected a negotiation and got a resignation instead. "Where are you?" Ryan started. "Enjoy dinner." I said it pleasantly, genuinely, the way you say it to someone when you know something they don't yet, and I walked out of that house into the Indianapolis evening without looking back. I left the envelope in the nightstand drawer, right where I'd put it 3 weeks ago, unsealed, Melissa's name on the front, everything inside documented and clear. She would find it when she changed the sheets, maybe Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, whenever she got around to it. It could wait. It had already been waiting 3 weeks. Ryan Crane, standing at that dinner table watching me go, had absolutely no idea that the man he'd just served an ultimatum to had spent 22 days building the most important document of his marriage, and had left it in the room down the hall. I drove to my old friend Curtis Webb's place on the east side of Broad Ripple. Curtis and I have been friends since 1994, when we were both working the same roof renovation and discovered we had identical opinions on 3 things: the right way to nail a ridge cap, the right temperature for coffee, and what kind of man deserves to be called a friend. He's lived alone in a brick ranch house for 12 years. He answers his door at any hour without asking what happened first. That is a man who earned 30 years of friendship. He opened the door at 7:30, took one look at me in the Samsonite, stepped back. Couch, just a few days. He put on coffee. We sat at his kitchen table, and I told him the short version. He listened the way Curtis listens. Completely still, hands around his mug, face doing the reacting so his mouth doesn't have to. When I finished, the kitchen was quiet. The envelope, Curtis finally said, "Yes, she'll find it. She will." And then, I drank my coffee, looked out Curtis's kitchen window at the Indianapolis night. And then, I said, "Melissa finds out who she actually married." Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and subscribe. You're going to love it here. Now, let me tell you what was in the envelope. 3 weeks before that Sunday dinner, on Wednesday, February 12th, at 2:14 in the afternoon, I was on the couch with my knee elevated and my crossword puzzle, my daily ritual. The one thing that makes recovery feel like a choice rather than a sentence, when Ryan's personal phone buzzed on the coffee table, where he'd left it by mistake before going to make a call from his office. I wasn't looking at it, I was looking at 11 across. But the screen lit up and the preview text was visible from where I was sitting, and I have 20/20 vision and a contractor's trained habit of noticing things that are out of place. The contact name was simply B. The message said, "Last night was everything. Miss you already." I set my pencil down. I sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then I picked up my pencil, wrote the date and exact time in the margin of the newspaper, and wrote down every word of that message. Because here is what 22 years of writing job site incident reports teaches you. The facts you don't write down are the facts that disappear. Over the next 22 days, I kept a quiet, methodical record. I did not go looking for things. I did not snoop through his office or access his devices. What I recorded were the things that appeared in front of me naturally, in the normal course of living in that house, which turned out to be considerably more than Ryan would have liked. The personal phone buzzed with messages from B on 9 separate occasions that I could observe. 3 times Ryan took phone calls in the garage with the door pulled partially closed, using the lower register of his voice that people use when they don't want the words to carry. One evening he came home 40 minutes late wearing a jacket I hadn't seen before. 2 mornings he left the house earlier than his schedule required and came back carrying coffee from a shop in Fountain Square, which is 20 minutes from Broad Ripple in the wrong direction for a man who never left the house before 10. I wrote all of it down, dates, times, details. No accusations, no interpretation, just the facts, organized and clear. The way an incident report reads. The way a document reads when a person who documents things for a living puts one together. On March 1st, the Saturday before the Sunday dinner, I wrote Melissa's name on the front of the envelope in my handwriting, put the full 22 pages inside, and placed it unsealed in the nightstand drawer. Then I packed my suitcase. And then I waited for Ryan to do what I'd known for 2 weeks he was going to do. He did not disappoint. There is a specific freedom that comes from having already made your decision. Not the freedom of impulsiveness. That's a different thing entirely, and it burns out fast. This is the freedom of a man who spent 3 weeks thinking through every version of what could happen, chose his path carefully, and is now simply walking it. Monday, March 3rd, 8 a.m. I was at Curtis's kitchen table with the first cup of coffee of what felt, genuinely, like the first morning of something better. The sun was coming through the east window the way Indianapolis March sun does. Low and pale and slightly apologetic, like it's not quite sure it's earned its place yet. Curtis had already left for work. He runs a small electrical contracting business out of a van and has the working hours of a man who enjoys his purpose, which I respect enormously. I had my phone, my legal pad, and a list of 3 things to do before noon. The first was to call my doctor's office and arrange to have my post-surgical follow-up visits handled through their North Indianapolis location, rather than the one near Melissa's house. That took 6 minutes. The second was to call my property manager, a reliable woman named Sharon Briggs, to check on my apartment on the east side of Broad Ripple, the one with the stairs that I couldn't manage with the knee. I asked Sharon whether the couple renting the ground floor unit in my building were still month to month. They were. I told her I'd likely need that unit for myself in about 3 weeks, when my recovery had progressed enough for me to manage alone. She said she'd let them know with proper notice. That took 11 minutes. The third call was the one I've been thinking about since February 12th. I called my attorney, a steady man named Bob Larkin, who has been doing family and estate work in Indianapolis for 25 years, and who handled Ruth's estate after she passed. Bob picks up his own phone before 9, which is one of the things I've always liked about him. Bob. Hank Doss. Hank, what do you need? Not for me. For my daughter. Eventually. I want to understand what her options look like in a situation where she has documentation of a spouse's infidelity and wants to initiate divorce proceedings. A pause. Not surprised, Bob Larkin has been practicing family law for 25 years and is not surprised by much. Does she know you're calling? Not yet. Hank. His voice was careful. You can't direct legal proceedings on your daughter's behalf without her consent. I'm not directing anything. I'm educating myself so that when she calls me, which she will, I can tell her who to call and what to say. A pause. That's a reasonable distinction. He ran me through the basics of Indiana divorce law for 20 minutes. Fault-based versus no fault. What documented evidence contributes to proceedings, what a wife is entitled to in terms of discovery, what the process looks like when one party has clearly been the wronged party. I took notes on my legal pad, thanked him, hung up. Then I made a second cup of coffee and went out onto Curtis's porch and sat in the morning quiet for a long time. I want to tell you something about that week, because I think people assume that when a man walks away from something that hurt him, he must be suffering, that the silence must be eating at him, that every hour without a phone call is an hour of agony. That wasn't my week. My week was the first genuinely peaceful week I'd had in 2 months. I slept well at Curtis's. Better than I'd slept in that guest room, where the awareness of being watched and evaluated and found insufficient had given everything a low-grade tension that I hadn't fully registered until it was gone. I did my physical therapy exercises every morning. I cooked dinner twice, Actual good dinners, and Curtis and I ate them at his kitchen table and talked about Indianapolis Colts history and a roofing job Curtis was bidding and a book I'd been meaning to finish for 4 months. I went for 2 short walks. My knee was progressing well. Through the broad ripple streets I'd known for 30 years. I did not call Melissa. I did not call Ryan. I did not call anyone connected to that house. My phone was quiet until Wednesday. Then, at 11:14 a.m. on Wednesday, March 5th, it rang. The number was Melissa's. I looked at it, let it ring, put it back down. Not yet. She called again at 2 p.m., again at 5. Left a voicemail each time. I listened to the first one that evening, sitting on Curtis's couch. Her voice was controlled but thin at the edges, the way a voice gets when someone is holding something together through sheer will. Dad, call me back when you can. I need to talk to you, please. Nothing about the pot roast. Nothing about the ultimatum. Nothing about Ryan. She found it. I was certain of it. The specific quality of that voicemail, the thinness, the please, was not the voice of a woman calling because she felt guilty about an argument. It was the voice of a woman who has opened an envelope and is now sitting with what she found inside and doesn't know what to do with her hands. I called Curtis that night, when he got back from his job. She called. He set his keys on the counter. How many times? 3 today. He nodded. Did you answer? Not yet. He opened the refrigerator, pulled out 2 beers, handed me one. When are you going to? When she's had enough time to decide what she actually thinks. Not what Ryan told her to think, what she actually thinks. Curtis considered this. How long does that take? I don't know. I've never left an envelope in a nightstand before. He almost smiled, almost. Curtis is not a man who gives smiles away cheaply, which makes them worth something when they arrive. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you for real. Thursday, 14 calls. I counted. Friday, 8 calls. The number changing. Melissa calling from her own phone, from Ryan's phone, from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be her coworker Patty's cell, which told me that wherever Ryan was in this equation, Melissa had reached the point of using other people's phones to try to reach me. Saturday morning, March 8th, 6 days after I left, the phone rang at 7:50 a.m., a number I didn't recognize. I answered because I thought it might be Sharon Briggs about the apartment. Dad. Melissa. Calling from a number I'd never seen. She got a new phone, or borrowed one I hadn't blocked. Except I hadn't blocked anything. I'd just been not answering. Her voice was different from the Wednesday voicemails. The thin quality was gone. What replaced it was something harder to describe, steadier, like a person who has been crying for 3 days and has come out the other side of it into something quieter and more certain. Melissa, I found the envelope. I let the silence sit for a moment. I know. How long did you know? 20. 2 days. A long pause. The kind that has things in it. Grief, anger. The specific vertigo of a world rearranging itself around new information. Why didn't you tell me? Documenting what I saw and making sure you had access to it. That was my job. What you did with it was always going to be yours. Another pause. Longer. It's been going on for months, Dad. I found her on his phone. After I read what you wrote, I looked. She has a name. She's in his contacts as B, but her name is Becca, and she lives in Fountain Square, and they've been... Her voice broke. Just for a second. Then came back. I threw him out Thursday night. The kitchen at Curtis's house went very quiet. Good, I said. Not triumphant. Not I told you so. Just good. The word that means, that was the right thing and you did it and I'm here. I need you to come over. Her voice was steady now. Fully. Not for him. He's gone. I need my dad. I was already standing up. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Revenge is the wrong word for what I did. Revenge implies you planned something against someone. What I did was simpler and older than that. I left the truth in a drawer and trusted my daughter to know what to do with it. She did. I drove to Melissa's house on the morning of March 8th, 6 days after I walked out with my suitcase and a smile that Ryan Crane completely misread. The drive through Broad Ripple took 19 minutes. The streets looked the same as they always had. Old houses, February bare trees just starting to think about March. A neighborhood that had watched me raise a daughter and was now watching the same daughter start something over. I knocked, which felt strange, knocking on a door in a neighborhood where I knew every porch, where Melissa had ridden her first bike, where I could hear the specific sound of this particular street in every season from memory. Melissa opened it almost immediately, which told me she'd been watching the window. She looked, not broken, which was my first fear, but hollowed out, the kind of hollowed out that comes right before you start filling back up. Dark circles. Hair not quite right. The expression of someone who has been through the acute phase of a shock and has arrived at the part where the body starts reminding you it still needs things like sleep and food and the presence of someone who has known you your whole life. She stepped forward and put her arms around me without saying anything. We stood in the doorway for a long moment. This is the part nobody talks about when they tell revenge stories. The part after, the part that isn't satisfying so much as necessary, when the thing that needed breaking has broken and now someone has to be there while the pieces are still on the floor. We went inside. I made coffee, the automatic action, the one that means I'm here and this is solid, and we're going to be okay. Melissa sat at the kitchen table and wrapped her hands around the mug I put in front of her, and we talked. She told me all of it. The envelope, she'd found it Monday afternoon, changing the sheets. How she'd sat on the edge of the guest bed and read every page of my notes. How she'd recognized the details. The Fountain Square coffee. The late evenings. The garage calls she'd told herself were work. How she'd already known, she said, in the way people know things they're not ready to know yet. The envelope didn't give her new information so much as it gave her permission to act on information she'd been carrying. I confronted him Thursday night. She looked at her coffee. He denied it for about 10 minutes. Then he stopped denying it. Then he cried. A pause. I didn't. No. I'd had 3 days of crying while he had no idea what I'd found, while he was still here acting normal. And by Thursday I was empty. There was nothing left to feel for him in that moment. What did he say when he left? He said you had no right to spy on him. I looked at my coffee cup. Spy. The specific word of a man who knows he was caught doing something wrong and has decided to reframe the catching as the crime. I wrote down what appeared in front of me in my own eyeline while I was sitting on a couch with a surgical knee. At no point did I access anything private. At no point did I enter a space I wasn't invited into. I know that, Dad. I want to make sure you know that. I know. She looked up. I also know that you saw it, and instead of coming to me with it directly, which would have made it a mess, you documented it carefully and made sure I had it in a way that let me make my own decision. She paused. That's the most dad thing you've ever done. Something loosened in my chest right then. Not pride exactly. Something quieter than pride. The feeling of a thing done correctly. Ryan Crame called me 6 times between Saturday and the following Friday. I answered once, on the Tuesday, the third call, because I wanted him to understand something directly rather than through an attorney. He started talking immediately. Defensive, rapid, the language of a man who has been rehearsing. How I had overstepped, how what happened between him and Melissa was between them, how my interference had. The job site voice. The voice that stops things. I'm going to say one sentence, and then I'm going to hang up. He stopped. You treated my daughter's father like a servant in a house he was helping pay for, while conducting an affair in the next room. The envelope is the least of what you deserve. I hung up. He called twice more that week. I didn't answer either time. Bob Larkin met with Melissa on Wednesday, March 12th. I drove her. I sat in the waiting room and read a magazine about fly fishing, which I have no interest in. For 45 minutes while my daughter met with a family law attorney about the process of ending a marriage to a man who had spent the better part of a year treating her father like household staff while conducting a second relationship in a house 6 blocks from where she grew up. When she came out, she looked lighter. Not happy, not yet, that would take time, but lighter. The specific lightness of someone who has made a decision and understood that it is survivable. In the parking lot, she stopped by the passenger door of my truck and looked at me. Bob says the documentation you kept is going to be useful. Good. He said you were thorough. Contractors document things. She almost smiled. You've been saying that since I was 12. It's been true since I was 12. I got in the truck. We drove back through Broad Ripple in the late afternoon light. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. A week later, I moved into the ground floor apartment in my building, the one Sharon Briggs had freed up, the one with no stairs. My knee was well enough for short distances, and the PT was going better than expected. I set up the kitchen first, the way I always do, because a kitchen is where a house becomes a home. On the Friday evening after the move, March 21st, exactly 19 days after I walked out of Melissa's house with a suitcase and a smile, my phone rang. Melissa, how's the apartment? Good light. You need anything? Not a thing. A pause. Comfortable. The specific kind of comfortable that means a conversation has found its footing. Dad. Yeah. I keep thinking about, you knew for 3 weeks. You lived in that house for 3 weeks knowing what you knew and you just sat with it. Someone had to. Why didn't you say something? To me? To him? Why the envelope? I thought about how to answer that. About Ruth, who always said I had a gift for knowing when to speak and when to let something speak for itself. About 31 years of job sites where the difference between a problem solved and a problem escalated was usually one man choosing patience over impulse. Because if I'd confronted Ryan directly, I said, it becomes a story about me and Ryan. 2 men disagreeing, accusations without proof, and Ryan is very good at talking, Melissa. He would have managed it. He would have managed you. A pause, but a document with dates and times and specific details, that speaks for itself. Nobody can manage a document. It just is what it is. Silence on the line. The envelope let the truth do the talking without me in the room. More silence. That's really something, Dad. I learned it from incident reports. She laughed. The real kind. The kind that came from somewhere clean and unguarded, and mine completely. The laugh of my daughter on the other end of a phone line in a city where we both still lived, where we always had, where we were going to keep living without Ryan Crane taking up space in either of our houses. It was the best sound I'd heard in months. What are you doing Sunday? She asked. Nothing planned. I'll cook. Come over at noon. What time? Noon, Dad. I'll be there at 11:50. Another laugh. Good night. Good night, sweetheart. I put the phone down on the kitchen counter of my new apartment. South-facing windows. Good light. My coffee maker in its correct position on the counter. Ruth's photograph on the windowsill where it belongs. Outside, Indianapolis was doing what it always does in late March. Making up its mind about spring. Still 50-50. The air carrying the first real suggestion of warmth underneath the cold. I had walked out of my daughter's house with a suitcase and a smile 19 days ago. Ryan Crane thought he'd seen a defeated man leaving. What he'd actually seen was a man who had already finished building something, quietly, carefully, over 22 days in a guest room, and was simply walking away to let it stand on its own. It stood. They always stand, the things you build right.